My name is Kathleen Russell, and I serve as the CEO of the Chamber. At this time, I would like to invite John Smigo from College Hunks Hauling, Junk, and Moving, a veteran-owned and operated business and a sponsor of today's breakfast, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, John. At this time, I would like to introduce Amy Grace, a member of our Board of Directors, to introduce our speakers and elected officials.
Good morning. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I would like to thank UPS, Crown Castle, College Hunks Hauling, Junk, and Moving, and FNBC Bank and Trust of LaGrange for their generous sponsorship and support of today's events. I would also like to acknowledge a few of my fellow board members, or Board of Directors, who have joined us today. Garson Hansen from United Parcel Service, who's also our past chair of the Board of Directors. Brian Kelly, manager of Home Depot, if you could stand. And Hassan Samra, Heartland Bank and Trust. And Scott Eggerding from Lyons Township High School. I also want to extend a huge thank you to the many officials from our municipal partners that have joined us today. Please stand when I call your name. Terry Carr, Mayor, Village of McCook. Kevin Russell, Trustee, Village of McCook. Ernest Millsap, Mayor, Village of Hodgkins. Patrick Rogers, Attorney of the Village of Hodgkins. Tim O'Brien, Trustee, Village of LaGrange, personal friend, great guy. Peggy Peterson, Trustee, Village of LaGrange. Melissa Niedermeyer, President, Village of Willow Springs. And Terrence Carr, Trustee, Village of Willow Springs. Thank you all for attending. We appreciate the support of LaGrange Business Association. I did see Nancy Cummins run in, so thank you. And LaGrange Park Chamber of Commerce, Western Springs Business Association, and the Westchester Chamber for helping us promote today's event. I would also like to give a big hug and shout out to Kathleen Russell, our Chamber CEO, and Megan Rowe, our Chamber Jane of all trades, for the tireless efforts and for organizing our legislative breakfast series. Honestly, without them and their efforts, we wouldn't have access to such talented and highly respected professionals in our community and today's well-known media professionals. So now it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderators for the breakfast. First up is Steve Palmer. Steve is a lifelong, if you don't know him already, a lifelong Village of LaGrange resident and a strong believer in community service. He was appointed to the Metro Board of Directors in 2016 and serves on the Lyons Township Mental Health Commission, the Board of Directors of the Illinois Restaurant Association, and is past president of the West Suburban Chamber. Steve is also the owner and operator of Stadium Club at the Max in McCook, so go check it out. Next up is Tom Serafin. Tom has carved out a unique space in the world of public affairs in Chicago and across Illinois. His strategic communications counsel and crisis management firm, Serafin and Associates, has been widely employed by businesses, government agencies, nonprofits, and news media. His expertise comes from years of hands-on experience, first as an Illinois legislative correspondent in Springfield, and later in the role of press secretary for several U.S. Senate campaigns and Gary Hart's presidential operation. In addition to being on the staff of U.S. Senator Alan Dixon and U.S. Rep. Dan Rostenkowski in Chicago and Washington, D.C., he has also been involved in some of the highest profile policymakers in Illinois and the nation. So now we'll look to Tom. I'll stop talking, and he will take over the program.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me all? Yes. This is going to be terrific this morning, and it's kind of interesting because we're going to have three veterans, young veterans of the world of politics and covering politics in Illinois. And I say young because my first reporter's job was 73, and that was the same year that the Chicago Sun-Times hired Mike Flannery to become a reporter. So it's good to have colleagues as young as myself. So I'm going to start introducing people from closest to myself on down. So Mike Flannery, who's been covering politics for a long time in Illinois, he's on fire every Sunday on Channel 32, WFLD. Mike, would you come to the stage, please? I was glad for that tidbit earlier. Shia Kapos. Our next two guests is really interesting because I wake up and I have to read Shia Kapos. And then before I have my first drink at night at 7 o'clock, I have to watch TTW to find out what Amanda says. So if you're in this business of politics, and most people are, and Mike certainly can testify this fact, that Shia Kapos, who started with Cranes, Sun-Times, now writes the Illinois Political, is a must read. I mean, you just have to read what's going on that day in Chicago, Illinois, and in the surrounding, geographies. So we're lucky to have her today. She came all the way from West Rogers Park. We're streaming this all over the world today, and we're going to go on Terry Martin's C-SPAN. So I just want everybody to know she's a hard-working reporter. She goes for the story, and here the story is this morning. Thank you for being here. Come on up and join us. Amanda Vinicky. I met her in Springfield. She worked for NPR covering the Illinois legislature. A nice young lady. And I thought, well, this is a tough place for a nice young lady, this place, the Springfield Capitol. Well, she cut it big time, and she's graduated the WTTW, and she reports on what's going on in Illinois and Chicago every evening. More importantly, she's a graduate of Lyons Township. She's LaGrange Park native, and one of our best alumni. We're happy she's back. Come on up. She had to come from the north side of Chicago as well, so it's a testament to your organization that these three fine professionals are here today. And I want to kick it off by asking a question of Mike Flannery. Mike has been doing this for a long time. He's seen a lot of races, governor's races. As of today, we have 3 weeks to the governor's election. Always there are surprises in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Mike, with all the surprises in your life that you've seen, not personally, but professionally, what do you think is going to happen in the next 3 weeks on the governor's race?
Well, I mean, as a prelude to answering that, I'll just recite what probably most of you, if not all of you, know. Amanda's group, WBEZ, together with the Sun-Times, did a survey that put J.B. Pritzker at 49%. The Illinois Broadcasters Association last night had a poll that had Pritzker at 49.7%. Both just a whisker under 50. And so I'd certainly much rather be J.B. Pritzker than Republican Darren Bailey, who the Broadcasters Association put at about 28%, the Sun-Times BEZ put at about 34%. But I do think that the lion's share of that undecided or not going to answer is, in the end, if at this point you haven't made your mind up about J.B. Pritzker, if you're not planning to vote for Governor Pritzker, you may be planning to. You may not be happy with him. So, Bailey is potentially going to get up into the 40s, I think, and it's a tough environment. I mean, there's been the pandemic. There's problems with the economy, inflation. And of course, we're going to get into it, I know, later, crime. The New York Times reported the other day that in a survey with Siena College, that there's Republicans nationally seem to be gathering some momentum, and I don't think we can ignore the fact that many of these otherwise local contests across the country, including here in Illinois, are getting nationalized. And all you have to do is eavesdrop on some of the candidates' forums or conduct some of them as I do on my show, and you get, I mean, even the, just lots of contests that you wouldn't think would be tapping into these national themes are. So I think that we're going to see things, this is going to be a closer contest than many expect. And last summer, David Axelrod was a guest, and he signaled that in June, saying, Governor Pritzker should bear down because this is not just going to be a walk, and this was before the primary when, it looked like the opponent might well be the mayor of Aurora, with Ken Griffin backing him with $50 million plus. It ended up being Darren Bailey, but I mean, he may benefit from some of those trends. The problem for Bailey is that even in his own internal polling, he's upside down, favorable, unfavorable. He's got high negatives for a guy who has just appeared on the scene. So those are a few thoughts I have.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to follow up with Shia. Everybody in the business that's running for office today has you on speed dial. So
they should be calling more often. I need some tips.
So let me ask you, what is the mood of the caller? What are they thinking behind the scenes? We know what people say on the front page of the papers, but what are people strategizing that they're not really talking about yet? What's going on behind the scenes of people's campaigns?
Depending who I talk to, if it's Republicans, more conservative folks, they feel, and I agree, that you don't know, I don't know that you can trust the polling completely that's out there. I think it's not as, I would be surprised if JB actually wins by that much. I think it's a lot closer, and I think it's closer because young people don't want to do polls. They don't answer their phones to do polling. I think that kind of skews a lot of things. I think generally more conservatives are leery of polling, so they don't respond. So I feel like the numbers, I cringe. I don't like to do a lot of polling stories because I don't know, it could change, from day to day, and I just don't know how accurate ultimately it's going to be. So that's what people talk about. And if you're in Chicago, they just want to talk about the mayor's race, but that's not exactly what we're here for. So.
Right, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
There's a huge race first, but the bigger race is, a few months down the road.
A few months down the road, right.
Amanda, your organization, WB, just finished a poll, and you looked at it statewide, and I thought it was interesting that downstate that the governor and Bailey were tied statistically. Of course, there's a margin of error there. That surprised me, and I think Shia makes a point when Republicans and others are a little bit more hesitant to pick up the phone and talk to a stranger, identify who they are, where they're going, what religion they are, and how they feel about some personal issues. What do you make of that poll?
So for starters, thanks for having me, and back to, the old stomping grounds, although we didn't really hang out here, weirdly, in high school. Strange that. But shout out to the Highland Queen. Have a pizza puff for me, y'all. I would say, in terms of the polling, I fully agree. And frankly, I've been polled for races such as my local aldermanic race, and it's kind of hilarious because the pollers clearly are from nowhere near, I don't know where they're at, but not Illinois. They don't know the names of anybody or how to pronounce them. So yeah, it's a very strange thing. Polling is going through a sort of its own reckoning these days. But I think that what you can hone in on that, it was surprising to see Pritzker doing as well, roughly, as Bailey downstate. Particularly if you visit downstate, you can't tell a lot by signs in yards and such. But let me tell you, as somebody who has driven around Centralia, Illinois, New Holland, Illinois, these small towns in sort of the relatively middle of nowhere farmland towns of 300 folks, they have Bailey signs. They have F Pritzker, fire Pritzker, still. So I don't necessarily get the takeaway that Pritzker is beloved in downstate Illinois. We have seen quite the transition in southern Illinois where there used to be bastions of Democrats. It is no longer that. It just isn't. So there is, it's sort of a saying is, demographics is destiny. And I think you can see that playing out a lot in the country, but including in Illinois. What you will likely see, and yes, I'm always hesitant to make predictions, but this is one you can make with some confidence, is that Pritzker will sweep in Chicago. He is going to not do as well in Southern Illinois. Bailey will there, but the numbers just don't win anything for it. You look at any map from the past several statewide elections, and yes, there are some outliers. Jesse White will do better than anybody else, any other Democrat, anybody. But you will see there is a sea of red in central and southern Illinois, and then it is blue in Chicago. The races are fought in the suburbs. Bailey isn't quite fighting there. He doesn't have the money to do so, and I'm not sure that he has the message. He's trying to hone in on crime, which certainly is something that folks are concerned about. You can have more talk about the economy, but he doesn't have the money to go forward with any message. And frankly, he doesn't have that strong a platform of details. I'm not saying strength in terms of I'm measuring it as favorable or not. I'm saying that it's just not bulky. There isn't any sort of heft in terms of what is behind his proposals. It's more just reaction than it is putting forward a plan. Maybe that's my cue to stop talking.
Wait, you can sing.
Yeah. I don't know. Was that singing? In the shower. Or at Highlands.
Yeah. I have to put in a plug for the Western Springs Theater right now. We just finished another musical. We're looking for musical actors. Please come by and see us, and it'd be wonderful to have you there. Anyway,
see Tom do some jazz squares.
Yeah, this is a commercial. Anyway, I wanted getting back to the attitude in the state of Illinois. Downstate's going to go Bailey, as you said. The city goes Pritzker, and the race is decided in this room and in this part of the world. The geography, the suburbs. Is that right, Shia?
Yeah, I think so. If you walk around with Bailey, even in Chicago, the city of Chicago, folks approach him. They say they're going to vote for him. They say they like him. So I don't feel like he's not making inroads. But as Amanda said, there hasn't been the kind of money to really advertise to folks here, so that's the big question, whether he can get his message out strongly enough to people.
And whether, I mean, it's partially money and message, and it's also just changes. I think, as Tom, you noted, we're seeing sort of polarization, tribalization in politics in Illinois and nationally. The decision overturning Roe v. Wade changed everything. And I don't know what sort of conversation we would be having had Republicans in the primary elected somebody with a more moderate position. I'm not sure it would be significantly different, but certainly with Bailey as the nominee in the post-Roe v. Wade world, and he's going to have a tough road, and no matter how much money he had, that would be something that in a state like Illinois would be a very difficult bump for him to get over.
Well, there's a reason that J.B. Pritzker spent millions and millions and millions of dollars to nominate Darren Bailey.
Yeah. I do think it'll come down to when you look at the suburbs. If Bailey makes inroads, it means that more people are concerned about crime. Whereas if you see a big influx of women voters in the suburbs, then most likely that means abortion was something that really is moving voters there. So.
Right. On that particular issue, I wanted to ask you about the national perception that Democrats are running on, saving democracy and on the abortion Dobbs vote, and the Republicans are running on the inflation economy not getting better. It can't get better under us. The crime issue in the streets and the border. They seem to be the three issues, especially driving in all the polling numbers. So the top two motivators, the vote motivators in the party, are democracy and the economy and inflation. Abortion is 10% or less in some of those issues. Are you surprised, Mike, that that issue hasn't sustained itself in a higher capacity? Some people say actually more pro-lifers will vote on that issue than
So it depends on the survey. It depends on the survey, Tom. So in that Illinois Broadcasters Association survey that came out last night, the number one, people were asked to name the 3 top issues, and they conglomerated the responses to Illinois finances, jobs, economy, and that added up to 41%. Right behind it was crime at 39%. Down the list was the Roe versus Wade decision, and then women's rights. Women's rights at 22%, the Roe v. Wade abortion decision at 19%. But if you added those together, if you aggregated those two the way they did the Illinois economy, finances, and jobs, it was almost 42%. That was actually the number one issue. So women's rights and the 22% saying women's rights and the 19% saying Roe v. Wade, you could make a case that's actually the number one issue. So other surveys...
That helps Pritzker, right?
I think it does. Anyway, so yes. It depends on who you talk to and how you frame the question. So that gave people a chance to cite the 3 top issues. If you ask people to cite the number one issue, abortion is further down. And crime, the economy, vie for number one.
And who knows? I mean, if gas prices keep falling, I watch really closely. They do seem to be dipping again, but I don't know if it'll, 3 weeks, who knows what they'll be like in 3 weeks. If they go up again, that kind of angers
I just
people.
think those are all factors that are going to make differences in contests, mostly outside of Illinois, perhaps in the 17th congressional district. That is not going to change the dynamic in, for example, the Illinois governor's race.
I was just going to say also, there's one thing that I don't think we've talked enough about, and there hasn't been enough coverage about, but what happened on June 28th is really significant. What happened in the Republican primary. And Tom DeVore, who's the Republican nominee for Attorney General, does talk about it, but he doesn't get much attention. He, Darren Bailey, and then Kathy Salvi, who's the Senate nominee running against Duckworth, really completed a takeover of the top of the ticket for that Trump conservative wing of the party. And, gone. They completely obliterated the Ken Griffin candidate with all of his tens of millions of dollars and then other challengers. That's completely gone is the Jim Edgar, Jim Thompson Republican Party. I mean, it was a blowout at every level. And, when I interviewed Kathy Salvi a few weeks ago on my show, I just went down a couple of key issues. And, she opposes aid to Ukraine. If she gets to the U.S. Senate, she's going to sign on to that Trump wing of the party that is skeptical about NATO. An absolute no vote on another dollar to Ukraine, and it's not the old Illinois Republican Party.
And I think not only is it not the old Illinois Republican Party, but where does the Illinois Republican Party go from here? You have seen its main funder literally move away. They are now Floridians, whether you like them or not. Bruce Rauner and Ken Griffin became all the entire base of the party's funding, with the exception of there are some candidates that still, for example, have backing from unions, from teachers' unions that have aligned with them. You're not going to see that as continually more conservative candidates get elected in Republican primaries. We have a changed face of the Illinois GOP, and arguably one that, barring major changes in, again, demographics is destiny, barring major population changes in Illinois that are not at all predicted, almost the further death and demise of the GOP in Illinois. Already, you have super minorities in both chambers of the General Assembly, and I think without, again, it's whether you like it or not, you need money in order to win elections oftentimes and to play. And because of the demographics of the state, the Republican Party is going to further see its power diminish.
Right, from very little power to begin with. But,
Right.
You know, we
Except
have,
for the Supreme Court.
Right.
There are
That's-
two state
that's a
Supreme
big
Court
race.
seats up.
Give us 5 minutes on this.
So there's 2 state Supreme Court seats up. If Republicans win them both, the Republican Party, Republican judges will control the Illinois State Supreme Court for the first time since before Tom graduated from the PAR program and before I went to work for the Sun-Times. For the first time since 1969, Republicans will control the state Supreme Court, and that has implications for redistricting and for many issues.
The judge made a ruling last night, right?
Right, they
Shia?
made a ruling last night, so there's a big question about how much money now can go into these campaigns. There was a limit put on, and now federal court judge said, no, putting that limit on is wrong. So it may mean that...
And it was brought by a conservative group.
Yeah.
And ironically, it's now going to free up J.B. Pritzker
Right.
to dip into his bottomless checking account.
Well, kind of. Wait, no, I mean, because it was money from outside of Illinois that had really been the contention. So this is Democrats, knowing that the Supreme Court is up for grabs, had limited no money if you were not an Illinois resident could go to judicial races. And so that is now the ruling that you cannot do that. There are still other judicial limits in place. And again, it's because there's a realization from both parties how important this is. But yes, there's certainly money freed up. Pritzker's already donated to each of the Democratic candidates in both of these $500,000, and there's a whole lot more where that comes from because a lot of this is outside spending by PACs, particularly in those Democratic races. You're seeing abortion access groups funding a lot of these commercials, and it's sort of with a wink and a nod because judicial candidates, they can't take positions. But it is certainly very easy to tell where allegiances lie if you go to any of the websites, see any of those commercials.
It's the confusing part about those Supreme Court races because you run as a Democrat or a Republican or whatever political party, but then once you're elected, you are nonpartisan. So it's very...
Totally nonpartisan. Totally.
Well, aren't all the identities, have been put in the blender the last 10 years, and people are picking and choosing where they want to be? Marie Newman, the congresswoman from this part of the world, along with about 6-7 other people in the Congress of 400 plus, voted against the Iron Dome, which was a kind of an odd vote because it was a defensive weapon for the state of Israel. It wasn't offensive. But it's just the same thing as you were talking about with your interview with your candidate. Nobody seems to be plugged into a constituency. Or is it so far over this way and that way that it's going to be a long time before you see somebody in the middle?
Well, I see former Congressman Dan Lipinski walked in a few minutes ago. Just
Hi, Congressman.
want to say howdy, howdy to Dan. Might be interesting to hear him talk about this nonpartisan or this, I don't know how you want to call it, but the no labels group that you've talked about, I know with Adam Kinzinger and some others. So
here in Illinois, it's the national politics of separation and extremism. Is it infecting our city council, as activities over the last week might indicate, or is it indicating that it's also in Springfield now? Or are we just like everybody else in the country?
I don't think the city council is going to feel it too much. So there are no acknowledged Republicans there.
I'm talking about the split to go to the progressives. And
There's
where
some
the mayor
left-leaning,
is.
right? And
Yeah.
there's some right-leaning.
Well, yeah,
folks
and,
on
and the teachers union and FCIU and AFSCME, I think, are going to be able to elect some more aldermen. The Progressive Caucus is going to grow bigger, I think, as a result of the city elections. But in Springfield, I think we're going to see this Republican, this conservative right takeover of the Illinois Republican Party playing out there. Now, the key is going to be as Shia referenced, can the Republicans break out of their super minority status in the General Assembly? it would be mostly symbolic. It still wouldn't enable them to pass anything.
Right, right.
And as a practical matter, we talk about it as a veto-proof
Where the
majority.
Republican wins on the ballot, if you go through the statewide races, if you go through the lieutenant governor, the AG's race, secretary of state's race, treasurer, controller, where do you see a Republican victory or a tight race?
I think Illinois 17, the congressional race, is the closest one that I'm
That's
seeing.
Sherry Bustos' old district.
Sherry Bustos' seat, and right now, you see Esther Joy King, who's a Republican who's been around for, she came within 6 points of beating Sherry 2 years ago, and she has a lot of name recognition going against Democrat Eric Sorensen, who also has name recognition. He's a weatherman, but he doesn't have the money that she has been able to raise, so.
Which is strange, because you would think nationally there is enough money there to pour more into it. So that has been sort of
That could be.
I mean, I think the races to watch, the bellwethers in Illinois, yes, in the Quad Cities area, but in the suburban races, it's these Supreme Court are really the ones where you'll sort of be able to see where attitudes play out to a degree. I mean, it's strange. The judicial races, they're at the end of the ballot. People might not know who they are, but certainly it has become a test of abortion. There will also be some just General Assembly races here and there throughout the suburbs that you can sort of maybe gauge where people are at. Again, Democrats very much have a fundraising advantage, but particularly those who voted for the Safety Act, that's that major crime overhaul that's getting a lot of attention.
Why is that getting attention?
I mean, I think it's getting a lot of attention because people are concerned about crime. You travel anywhere and you say you're from Chicago and people are like, ooh.
It's titled Safety Act, so is it about safety?
Well,
There are elements that are, yes.
Yeah, it is a very complicated, it's a huge bill. It is 800 pages, and what's getting a lot of attention is the move to cashless bail. But it does a whole lot more than that, and I would say there are those who are purposely contorting the truth, and then there are those on both sides who are stretching it to try and get their way. And you talk to folks on both sides of it, and they'll sort of admit that it has become difficult to have conversations about it, particularly any admitted in public, because they're both so hammered in. So I use the example there's one. This is sort of an easy one that's getting a lot of attention, that critics of the Safety Act say it was passed with no real debate. It was in the dead of night. There was no review. Backers say, hey, that isn't true. We've been talking about moving to cashless bail for literally years. There was a Supreme Court commission devoted to discussing this very subject. It wasn't passed in the dead of night.
And they had dozens and dozens of hours of hearings to discuss it and debate it.
So both are right, is the thing.
Right.
I mean, it was passed in the dead of night. Nobody read that 800-page bill. It didn't go through the proper days that technically the Constitution calls for, but it did have
the reticence
these months.
to admit that it's their bill? It's my bill, I passed it, I worked on it, yeah, maybe we can tweak it by making this a 2-day delay or something. People are kind of not embracing that bill on the campaign trail.
Well, there's a lot of silliness in this debate.
Why 100 out of 102 states attorneys saying no? They're not all Republican.
Correct. That's correct. And
guys.
let's look at the resources those prosecutors have. Those prosecutors know. Look, set aside. I think it's a silly and absurd debate. This whole thing: are there non-detainable offenses or not? That's arguing how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Here's the reality. This law actually does implement what's in the U.S. Constitution. You are innocent until proven guilty. And the founding fathers in their debate, there weren't any founding mothers there, that were at least recorded as voting. The idea was in that rural society back then, when there were only 3 million people here instead of 330 million, there was a sense that typically you'd be accused of something, then you'd go home and you'd wait for your trial. This law puts new obstacles in the way of a prosecutor or even a judge who wants to detain somebody before the trial. And here's what's going to happen. And now, prosecutors and police are going to have to review dozens of hours of body-worn camera video, dash cam video. They're going to have to make a case that this person, and again, this is one of the things that the Supreme Court task force, Amanda, that you referenced, the Supreme Court task force, looking at this, has said, they've made a series of recommendations to say this law has to be clarified because there's an argument that Kwame Raoul, the Democratic Attorney General, has acknowledged. There is some concern that some judges will interpret the language in this law, which is somewhat ambiguous, to mean that the prosecutor has to prove that if Tom Serafin is arrested for murder, that he is a threat to another specific person. Well, the defense attorney could actually potentially get up and say, well, the guy Tom murdered, he's had a feud with for 50 years. There's nobody else he's having a feud with, so he's not a threat to anybody else. Or a carjacker who maybe even shot 5 people in the course of carjackings. You say, well, who's the specific person that this carjacker's a threat to? And so we're down by a couple hundred state's attorneys. A couple hundred people have left the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. The DuPage County State's Attorney, Bob Berlin, is hiring 30 more prosecutors.
Tell the folks what's going on in the State's Attorney's Office. And if you're a politician and you're running for office in this day and age, 3 weeks out, and you're explaining, you're losing. That's why I'm saying I don't understand the messaging on this legislation. I just don't understand what they thought they were getting themselves into. It may be wonderful legislation, but they were unprepared. I don't understand that.
It is interesting to me that Democrats, those who backed this, were not more prepared for there to be a sort of reaction to it. I think that there's
because
a
it was
bunch
there
of,
from the beginning.
Exactly. There was always pushback.
Yeah.
And remember, this was passed in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and the Black Caucus had been calling for many of these changes and jumped on an opportunity, which is what you do in politics. It is surprising that those who are paid a heck of a lot more money than I will ever make, that are paid consultants to run these campaigns, were not more prepared for messaging or for their fixes to be made. There was a truncated legislative session. There were attempts to address some of these criticisms, and it didn't get done.
Is this the strongest issue for the Republican Party this year?
It could be, yes, I think that and the economy, but in
Statewide.
the General Assembly isn't going to be able to do a ton there. You certainly saw, obviously, attempts to do that with the tax relief package and what you've gotten in your mail. Democrats passing that and trying to, you see the commercials, Pritzker, look what I gave to you. Certainly there's a notion that the economy is there. But yes, this is a huge issue for Republicans, particularly in some of those suburban races, if they are able to make that case. And still, I don't personally put a lot into polls, not as much who are you going to vote for, but how do you judge if you care more about abortion, the economy, what have you? You go to the grocery store, you have a huge bill, and you say, all right, economy, it's it today. You talk to your friend who's got a teenage daughter going through some reproductive health issues, abortion wins that day. I mean, I think any of those, what do you label first, second, third, are very difficult to judge. But yes, this could be the Republicans' opportunity in some of these races if they are able to make that argument. And Democrats are not having that discussion as much as possible because it is nuanced, and in some of the suburban races, they don't want to have that nuanced conversation, particularly before an election. That is why, in part, and also timing, the General Assembly won't be dealing with it until after the election.
The general perception, if you walk into a place where there are libations being served, the Safety Act is considered almost not helpful to crime, just the other way. So it's difficult to go out and campaign on it because the perception is wrong. Once that narrative took off, it was difficult to turn that tanker, to turn that ship, and I think that's what the governor and the people are trying, his folks are trying to do, try to turn that. We're taking questions from the audience, so there are cards and pens on the table, so please feel free to get the cards up here, and Mr. Palmer will go through them. He's an editor way back when he was in first grade. He's going to go through to make sure all those tough questions are properly worded. So we're going to go back here and follow up on what the panel was talking about. 57% of the people voted in the last off-year election, 2018. I think 73, 74% voted in the general election following that. So that's a considerable drop-off. Do you think there's energy in the Republican small wing of the party or the Democratic wing of the party? Do you think 57% is going to be about the same thing, somewhere in the mid-50s this time out? Or do you think Chicago's going to be more interested in voting? Seems like Chicago voters are kind of half asleep right now. You know, when I go to places, and out in the suburbs and downstate, there seem to be more alive. You know, there's less food on the table, but they're more alive with some energy.
Well, turnout will be the big question. I mean, that will determine the entire election, obviously. I feel like right now there is not a lot of energy. I was just at the downtown Chicago polling site yesterday where Obama came in to vote, and I asked if they closed the site because nobody else was there, and they're like, no, it was open. The public could come in, but nobody else was there.
Wow.
Well, remember, we have, there's 764,000 people have registered for absentee ballots. So, you know, I just know from my own social circle and family circle, there are a ton of people voting by mail.
That's
Sure,
a big circle.
sure.
You have 700,000.
He's very popular.
So now, let's go to the congressional side. We have a big race here in our congressional district out here. Sean Casten is running against the mayor. A lot of people think that could go either way right now, especially some of the private polls I've seen. And the same way for the district just north of us. The turnout in the burbs is higher. That race may go Republican.
Well, those three suburban seats that over the last decade Democrats flipped, you know, Bill Foster's seat, the Sean Casten seat's the one you're talking about
Right.
there, and then Lauren Underwood up in 14. If there is a red wave in the suburbs, those Democratic seats will be close or could flip to the Republicans. You know, in the absence of a red wave across the suburbs, you know, those Democrats, you know, will hold on. So that's one of the things to watch. In addition, I'm going to be watching that as well as the Supreme Court on November 8th when we count the votes.
That Sean Casten, Mayor Pekow, am I pronouncing that right? Race is interesting. Pekow. That race, Politico does not rate that as, you know, a sure thing for Casten. Right now it's leaning Democrat, which is a little bit over, whereas, you know, Illinois 17 is a toss-up. So we have toss-up and a sure thing, and the Casten-Pekow race is right in the middle. So Casten has so much more money, and it's, you know, yes, that's what determines a lot of times where a race goes, because they can buy advertising, they can get their message out, and right now Sean Casten has the money to get the message out over the mayor.
Thank you. Amanda, do you?
I would just offer that again, while some, and we've been talking about the disadvantage that Illinois Republicans have in terms of fundraising, and that is somewhat true as well nationally, that Democrats have been out fundraising. Republicans have a whole lot of money at the national level. So if the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee really saw some of these races as competitive, they would presumably, knowing what is at stake, would be funneling more campaign workers and money toward them. And that, to me, is sort of an indicator for those who would know better than I and are closely polling.
Thank you. I did a little research, and I pulled a couple paragraphs from people that have been in high office in this country in the last few hundred years. And I just wanted to read 3 of them to the panel and ask them which one of those might be really important come November on the ballot. What might be the motivating attitude of people? And I'll just quickly read them out loud here. The first one is a quote from Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was president during the 60s, took over after John Kennedy was assassinated. He said, "The separation of church and state is a source of strength, but the conscience of our nation does not call for separation between men of state and faith in the supreme being." William Henry Harrison is the next quote. There is nothing more corrupting, nothing more destructive of the noblest and finest feelings of our nature than the exercise of unlimited power. And our last one goes to a gentleman by the name of Ben Franklin. Ordaining of laws in favor of one part of the nation to the prejudice and oppression of another is certainly the most erroneous and mistaken policy. At equal dispensation of protection, rights, privileges, and advantages is what every part is entitled to and ought to enjoy. So those are kind of three perspectives that a lot of voters have talked about in different ways, and I found them in various different places where I go to sometimes to figure out what I'm really doing that day. So who would like to start? Mike, you look like you want to
I
start.
feel like I'm in my son's homework session right now.
Yeah, I need those written out or on a board or something, Tom. I'll hone in on the last one, Ben Franklin. I do think that you see now in why abortion or in the economy, why these gain so much traction is in a sense obvious, but it's also people are motivated when they're ticked off, when you take something away from them, when you strip away an opportunity, be it an opportunity for a job, be it an opportunity to buy something at the grocery store, be it an opportunity for a woman to make a choice about whether she wants to have a child or not. And so that is, to me, a prime motivator when you look at what gets people to care about a candidate, and that is why in this time where we are seeing a polarization of our nation, why you are seeing a lot of local issues fade into the background, it is because those are just instinctual motivators, and it is what draws people, and it is what political parties are honing in on.
Thank you. Shia?
I like the LBJ quote about separation of church and state, I think, just because that goes back to the Revolutionary War, too, when they were, writing the Declaration of Independence and just remembering that just because you believe one thing in your personal life, in the bigger picture, we are all, we have all these inalienable rights to live a free and peaceful and happy existence, no matter what you believe in your faith. And I wish this wasn't on video. I don't know.
Mr. Flannery.
I find myself thinking about the men you named there. I don't know much about William Henry Harrison, but I've read Robert Caro's trilogy about LBJ, and Ben Franklin was a remarkable libertine in his private life. Those two guys were you know what? I'm in the middle of a panel. Can I call you back? Okay.
A reporter's life. Yeah.
So rather than the deep philosophies that these deep philosophical thoughts they're espousing, I mean, I think mentioning those two fellas in particular reminds me how grounded many people are in what happens in their lives, and I think voting is an expression of what's happening and who they are and the pressures they feel. I think that's what I take away from your mentioning their names.
Of all the people that you've covered, all the elected office holders, people running for office, who stands out to you when you're 10 years from now, you're sitting there, having coffee, trying to figure out where the ice is in the refrigerator? What's the guy or gal that you remember?
Well, so there are two people. One, Richard J. Daley. I covered his last campaign in 1975 for the Sun-Times. I mean, he was a larger-than-life figure by the time I met him, and it was remarkable in that period to see the candidates, the national Democrats who came to pay court, and they all did. And it's been fascinating. It's been fascinating to listen to the conversations at the Kennedy Library in Cambridge, Mass, and the LBJ Library in Austin, Texas. I've gone to both places and listened to JFK and LBJ talk to Old Man Daley, and how particularly with LBJ, the two of them were peas from the same pod, as born 1,000 miles apart in very different social settings. But they were really, it's fascinating to hear them talk about getting legislation passed. And the other is Barack Obama. I mean, in 1997, I think I was the first Chicago reporter to put him on TV. He had a bill in the state Senate he wanted to get through, so we talked then. I had no idea that just 11 years later, he'd be, on his way to the White House.
Obama owes it all to Flannery.
How about you, Shia? You're top two.
I interviewed Barack Obama once, too, when he was in the state Senate, and I was so irritated because he spoke in such a high level, it was hard to get. I'm like, can we just bring it down to the way, regular people will understand what you're talking about? And who would have known? Now people hung on his every word, I guess, as he went into the White House. That was exciting to report on him a little bit. And then following Richard J. Daley was just kind of a crazy time because interviewing and being with him on the trail in the city, doing his everyday work, as well as on the campaign trail, he was somebody who was hard to nail down, and getting ideas from him, and then you'd go back to your office and you wondered what in the world he just said. It was kind of all but there were always nuggets in there. It was interesting.
There were a lot of reporters
that he had such a big presence, but sometimes you wondered exactly what
Richard
he was
J.
saying.
Daley's press secretary,
Richard
Earl
M.
Bush.
Daley, I meant.
You're
Sorry.
talking
Yeah.
Richard M.
Richard M.,
Well,
yeah.
his father, Richard J. Daley's press secretary, Earl Bush, who went to federal prison for a crooked deal at O'Hare on billboards, he famously came into the press room and complained that he wanted reporters to print what Old Man Daley meant, not what he said. So when we were confused, we would just literally transcribe it. As Mike Royko wrote in Boss, Richard J. Daley often failed to exit the same sentence he had entered.
Amanda, who are your top two?
Madigan and Madigan, right? How it's crazy to me that we've had this entire discussion. He hasn't really been brought into it, particularly in light of course, just recent news that yet charges added, and what is happening with ongoing corruption trials, all connected to the former speaker who, covering Madigan was fascinating also, just the amount of power and the way he interacted with the press.
Aren't they being
fascinating.
arraigned this week, today, in the federal court? Will Mike Madigan ever see the inside of a cell?
Ooh, I don't know.
I don't think so.
It'll be a long time.
Yeah, we got years to weigh in on that.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Ed Burke has been charged, and it's been 4 years since he's even been in the courtroom.
Right, his trial's in 23. So, yes.
I think it's near the end of 23.
Yes.
Which would be 5 years, right?
Yes. What do you think? Will Mike Madigan?
Look, here's the problem for every politician in the city of Chicago, and again, Congressman Lipinski has seen many of them come and go, and often have the jail door clang behind them. I do think in federal court that a Chicago or Illinois politician, no matter what the U.S. Constitution says, in the eyes of most Illinois jurors, a politician is guilty until proven innocent. And it's tough to beat the rap. And I watched Balago fight through 2 trials. It was just one of the craziest things, one of the craziest spectacles I've ever seen. It was obvious how it was going to end. The only reason he got acquitted in the first trial was because his brother Robert was such a sympathetic figure, a career military officer whom the feds made the stupid mistake of indicting with his brother. Robert Blagojevich was an honorable guy, trying to help his brother, trying to do the right thing. He should have gotten a medal as Brother of the Year. And in the second trial, the feds did dismiss the charges against him and focus on Balago. I think if Madigan and/or Burke at this point go in front of a jury, I think they get convicted. That's my surmise.
Well, thank you very much, panel. We have some questions from Steve Palmer from the audience. Steve?
Well, one of them right off the bat would be, how can this come down to two issues in this election, Roe and the Safety Act? We have so many other things to talk about in the state. One, the state checkbook has to be almost empty, and the federal pandemic funds will dry up in the beginning of 2015. Nobody's talking about what they're going to do financially or anything else in this election right now. How can that happen? How do we let our election come down to two issues?
That's the way most elections come down.
It is frustrating
and you
as a
rarely-
reporter to cover it too, and to have no answers to some of those questions. I mean, I believe both of the candidates for governor have been asked and pressed about
Right.
their plans for the budget, and neither really want to talk about it. Try as you might.
Right. So we're not. It isn't that we don't talk about it. I actually I asked Darren Bailey about it, and he once told me he can cut $14 billion from the Illinois budget just like that. Well, give me one program you're going to eliminate, because that's about a third of the budget, right? That's about a third of the operating budget.
We have on the top of the ballot, the first thing you're going to see, two amendments. One for the Cook County Forest Preserve for a tax increase. I think it's 0.25% or whatever it is. They're going to ask for a tax increase. And the other one is collective bargaining, Illinois Amendment number 1. You're all business people in this room, obviously, with the chamber. That's probably something you're also concerned about. That question might go to that. Do you think, ladies and gentlemen of the panel, that both of those pass? Or what's your instinct on that?
It's funny, I've seen more Forest Preserve advertising than I have for the other one. If we go by that last amendment 2 years ago, I don't know that labor amendment is going to pass. I don't feel like there's the same momentum behind it, but maybe I'm not as plugged into the labor movement. Maybe that will pick it up and carry it over.
I see lots of ads for it. I see that guy with operating the heavy piece of equipment.
Oh, that's true.
And a nurse.
Yeah, it seems like he's always there when I flip through the channels, along with the Supreme Court pictures of Mike Madigan and then Mary Kay O'Brien and Elizabeth Rochford, as though Madigan were pulling their strings. My guess, and I know the business community is scared about it. I think that that Amendment 1, that workers' rights amendment, as the unions have dubbed it, I think that probably passes.
Mr. Palmer?
I agree, by the way it's worded, that it has a better shot at passing right now, and that's
And the labor movement is motivated. So you have unions that have not only the advertising, again, the money to put up the commercials, but can go door to door. Their folks all come out. And others, I think, are less educated about it. So one would be inclined to believe that. And in terms of the forest preserve tax, nobody likes to vote for a tax increase, especially right now, but there really isn't any opposition that has put forward any effort to defeating it. So I have no polling, no way to really gauge that other than those two sort of obvious inclinations. It wouldn't add up to a ton of money, but I don't know when you see that on the ballot, what people think in terms of their own pocketbook.
Partisan groups are always stronger with lower turnouts, and this is an off-year election. Lower turnout, the numbers the unions have to the table are larger. Same with business, though.
Yep.
Well, and so you think about the last big referendum question on the graduated income tax. How was that defeated? You know, Ken Griffin gave again tens of millions in that and others. And they focused, that was an extremely well-focused opposition campaign. And they framed the question. You know, they put the picture of Madigan up there and they put the General Assembly wide shot up there. Are you going to trust these people with a tax increase? And 54+% said no. I don't see that kind of campaign taking place right now.
Plus, the supporters of that graduated income tax had a campaign that I think wasn't human enough. It was lots of numbers and charts, and you didn't really know what it was they were asking. Right.
This next one starts off with, let's get fired up. What's the panel's personal feelings on crime, inflation, and gas prices. And why aren't these all at the top of the list in this election right now?
Well, I do think crime is. Gasoline prices. I'll defer to Shia here.
I have no personal view on any of them, though I do like scope out the low, there's a place on Skokie Boulevard that has lower gas, so. I think we've indicated those are all part of the equation, and it just depends as a voter what matters to you most. If you are a hardcore feminist, you are going to say abortion is the issue for me, and I'm going to vote this way. If you feel like the economy is going to hell in a handbasket and gas prices are too high, you may vote for Darren Bailey because you might blame Pritzker, even though Pritzker isn't exactly to blame for what's happening across the country. What was the third one?
Economy.
The economy. That kind of fits with gas prices, yeah.
Well, I'll give you my personal view on crime. I guess I kind of ducked it. I think it's just a disgrace what's happening in Chicago and Cook County. I'm a broken record on this. I've been saying it for many years, and it predates Lori Lightfoot, but it's gotten worse under her.
Why?
Well, just the numbers. If you're shot and survive, in only about 3 or 4% of the shootings where the victim survives in Chicago is there an arrest.
And that's because
95, 96, 97% of the people who get shot in Cook County don't have somebody arrested for shooting them.
In part because there are fewer police officers. In part, that is not just a Chicago problem. There are fewer police officers in every community across the state, across the country, because of, it's a morale issue. Police departments have a morale issue across the country.
Okay, yes. But in LA, on a per capita basis, the number of detectives, and in New York, the number of police detectives is far larger. And I ain't the smartest guy in the world, but I'm not the dumbest either. And it seems to me the way to stop the killing is to start locking up some killers. And we just don't do enough of it. We don't have enough detectives. We don't have enough state's attorneys. We don't have enough prosecutorial resources.
Why?
Well, because it doesn't rise to the... Look, if I were a Democrat, I'd be running right now at tonight's debate. If I were J.B. Pritzker, I'd say, I'm going to propose hundreds of millions of dollars to hire more state's attorneys. And I'm going to create an incentive for local police departments to promote more detectives. And we're going to start locking up the shooters. And that's one way to reduce the shooting. Look, if you live in Lawndale, if you walk through, you're in the Austin neighborhood on the west side. I have talked to women. There's one woman in particular on the west side who I've interviewed several times. She's been told by eyewitnesses who killed her son. She knows the name of her son's killer. She's given it to the Chicago police. They don't have an eyewitness who will testify. They don't have surveillance video. And this guy, this killer, actually taunts her because he knows that she's been out there trying to get him arrested. I think that's a fundamental function of government. You want to know why a lot of people don't trust government? We can't lock up killers. And if you're in Austin or Englewood or Lawndale, you are watching them, the killers, walking down the street.
I think you're being overdramatic about
in
this.
In broad daylight. That's what happens. So go ahead.
Murders are down in Chicago. Murders are down in Chicago.
Compared to last year.
Compared to last year.
35% up since 2019 when Pritzker and Lightfoot took
crime is
office.
no longer just in black and brown neighborhoods on the south and west side. Suddenly, white neighborhoods are feeling it too, and that has got everybody agitated. So you have half the community saying, oh, now you finally notice what we've been experiencing this whole time. So it's hard, I think, for the mayor or whoever's in charge of saying, okay, now we're going to be concerned, even though this was a problem all the time over here.
It's one of those issues that, everybody feels passionate about, because everybody wants to go outside and feel like they can walk to the store. And it's a tragedy in whatever neighborhood you're in, that we don't focus all our resources from the top down, the bottom up, on solving that one issue. Give people the opportunity to sit on their porch stoop. The one thing that bothers me is all the children that are always being, targeted nowadays. Moving on, Steve has another question.
Well, just one off the cuff, quick political advice. We're local people, some local trustees, some people that might want to be a trustee someday or run for a school board. The example of Christine Redonio, who started out as the president of the PTC, became a village trustee, and then ended up being the highest ranking Republican in the Illinois Senate. What advice do you have for people, or what can you suggest for people to motivate them to get involved and maybe be part of the change that we need to happen?
In terms of getting elected, or?
Running for office, being involved in politics?
I feel like the people that have the most success are the people that knock on doors every single day to get elected. And they really get to know their community that way. They get into the state legislature or to city council and really have a good sense of what their community is about and are dedicated to listening to those folks. And they seem to be the most successful going forward.
I mean, I haven't ran a campaign since like my student council days, but
Former student senate president.
Yeah, better believe it, baby. So I don't know, but I do think, yes, it's that. It's door knocking. It is being involved, showing up to events like this, of course, and it's also not being stupid on social media, because that can really bite you in the butt. Watch out.
Well, you're right there. You're absolutely correct. There's one other question we have here. Do you see House Bill 3653, the Safety Act, being repealed, rather than go through this because we're running out of time?
No.
It's not going to be repealed. It'll be amended and cleaned up, as most legislation is after it's passed, with subsequent findings from.
And J.B. Pritzker can't be the one to do it. That's a little bit why he keeps not answering the question so well. Yes, he would like to see new language, but it's not his job to do it. Legislators have to get it done, and then
it could
maybe
be
they
his
talk
job.
to
He's
him.
the governor.
Yeah, he's the governor.
He does not want to take the
them.
lead because he wants to appease both the moderate base and a very progressive side that he needs to get out of any sort of primary, particularly if he is eyeing the White House.
Well, we buried the lead. Our last question. We want to thank you all for being here. It's wonderful. You came a great deal of distance to be out here with us. The chamber is flattered and honored that you're here today. We know you're going to be covering the governor's debate tonight, so it's a long day for all of you. The last question: who's going to be facing each other in the runoff for mayor, the city of Chicago, after February of next year? Who are the top two candidates?
Well, I think Lori Lightfoot gets in the runoff.
So
I think Lori Lightfoot gets in the runoff. I'm not sure that we still have the final field out there. So I have no idea who's going to do it. The polling shows
Willie
that
Wilson,
there's a cluster. Willie Wilson,
Vallis,
Paul Vallis.
Gomez.
If Chuy Garcia gets in, which I'm tending to think he won't, but him, I think. And if this
Brandon
election,
Johnson has a shot. He's got CTU. He's got union backing. Brandon Johnson.
Yep. And if this election is if it's a referendum on the incumbent, she loses. If she succeeds in making it a choice election, then she has a chance. It's going to be an intensely negative campaign, depending on who her opponent is. I mean, that's her only path to victory in a runoff, is run an intensely negative campaign to try to make it a choice.
It depends
The
on who
election
it
is
is.
February 28th. The Safety Act goes into effect January 1st. Shia, is that the driving issue in that campaign then?
I don't know that it's a driving issue in the mayor's race. The mayor has spoken out against against how Kim Foxx's office has handled a lot of these issues, echoing Mr. Flannery here to some extent too. So I don't know how that will play in the mayor's race. Oh yeah, she'll make the runoff, but the question is who would make it with her, I think.
Agreed. I mean, at this point, I think Lightfoot makes the runoff, and there's no way to tell what becomes of at that point. Nobody thought that there would be a Mayor Lightfoot if you traced back. We all thought we'd have yet another Mayor Daley. So it's very impossible at this early juncture to predict.
So remember that in that runoff, she got 17%, and
once you make the runoff, the game changes.
And Preckwinkle got 16% or so. So again, if we have a big field, which we may well have, somebody could get into the runoff again with a surprisingly small percentage of the vote, which is why it's so difficult to predict.
And one of the reasons Lightfoot made it last time, in part, there are a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons was she knocked on doors and really had a good ground campaign. And by all indications, she has that again. If you keep track of her on the weekends, she's out knocking on doors every weekend and does have a good ground campaign. So we don't really talk about that much, but I think that is going on, and that will be important in how that race goes.
And she won. I mean, she ran in the runoff against a wounded Tony Preckwinkle, who was hurt along with and Susana Mendoza, who I think was on track to become the next mayor. Mendoza and Preckwinkle were hurt very badly by the raid on Eddie Burke's office because because of their connection. Preckwinkle and Mendoza had links to Ann and Ed Burke. That's why Lori Lightfoot is the mayor today.
So you prompt one more question. 2 weeks before February 28th, on Valentine's Day, does Pritzker get involved and endorse a particular candidate?
Ooh.
No.
He has resisted so far by saying,
Right.
one election at a time. That'll become harder to say after
He's
November
also
9th.
very, very careful, and he, again, I think has his heart and eyes potentially, depending on how things work out, on higher horizons, so you don't want to really tick anybody off. The only reason he would possibly do that is there is some major writing on the wall and the race were already decided, but it would be very surprising to see him wade into those waters when he doesn't have to.
Yeah, my old boss, Senator Alan Dixon, always said, you never get involved in the family fight. And that's what a primary is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Doesn't make any sense. Thank you so much for coming all the way out here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for everybody here in the chamber. If we could have the sponsors and the panelists just get in front for some photographs before you leave. We could have the sponsors come up, please, and the panelists right out front. That would be very, very wonderful. Thank you for being here.